Over the last 6 years, Barack Obama's foreign policy with geopolitical important countries has been both lauded and criticized. But with a Republican majority in Congress and 2 years left in his second term, can he achieve anything major in a polarized political atmosphere? To discuss, I'm joined by Majid Rafizadeh, a US Middle East foreign policy expert. He's in Boston. And from New Hampshire, we have Daniel Benjamin. He's a former ambassador-at-large and coordinator for the US State Department. Thank you both for joining us. Majid, first of all, I want to speak to you about Iran. There was a lot in this speech about Iran and a threat to the US Congress of a veto if they consider more sanctions.
Yes, absolutely. I think the president took a right position in arguing that the diplomatic initiative should take priority now. I think they are in the final stages, as you know, of striking a final deal. I think any kind of bill which introduces new sanctions on Iran is going really to make Rouhani's administration efforts much harder to convince the hardliners in Iran that they should continue negotiating with the United States. So I think the position of continuing with the diplomatic initiative and making more diplomatic headway is the wise way to take ahead. But I think there was really not a clear agenda laid out from President Obama so that it can assure us that the both parties, the Democrat and Republican, are not going to go ahead with the sanction bill.
Daniel Benjamin, has that veto threat suggest how difficult and precarious the talks are between Iran and the world powers?
Well, the talks are by themselves very challenging, and it's an open question whether or not they can succeed. But the president is certainly eager to avoid having Congress take action that would undermine the talks. There are many on Capitol Hill who are sympathetic to the Israeli position that says that the U.S. is conceding too much to the Iranians. And the president put down a marker, and I think a very clear one, that if these talks fail, and particularly if they fail because of intervention because of Congress, then war becomes a very likely possibility. The president has said he will not allow Iran to have nuclear weapons. And at the same time, I think he very much wants to avoid hostilities. So he's making his argument very, very clear to the Congress about the consequences of imprudent action.
Yeah, Majid, there was a war threat looming over that whole speech.
Yes, I think if I can add something an argument that some of the congressmen they make is that the sanctions actually brought the Islamic Republic to the bargaining table. That's to some extent true, but I think at this particular time, I think additional sanction will have counterproductive result.
Of course, the Congress passing is a threat of sanctions if these talks do not go ahead. One thing the president really hammered home, though, was a sort of commitment to fight terrorism, continuing to fight terrorism going forward. Do you think that was strong enough, Daniel? Do you think the language was strong enough going forward, considering the threats of ISIL?
Well, I thought the language was just fine. It's the politics that are always the challenge, and there is a groundswell of support for more vigorous action against ISIL, particularly on Capitol Hill. At the same time, the president knows well that the American people do not want to see a return of a robust military engagement in Iraq. And in fact, the president announced at the very outset of the speech how happy he was that our wars, our combat missions in both Iraq and Afghanistan are over, and that the level of troops involved in combat abroad has come down dramatically. And in fact, we only have 15,000 now stationed in Iraq, and a small number who are assisting the Iraqis in that country. I'm sorry, 15,000 in Afghanistan. So I think that the president, is saying yes, there's a challenge. Yes, we're going to fight these terrorists. We're going to beat them, but we should do it in a prudent way, and we shouldn't think about getting involved in a ground war again in the Middle East.
Daniel, do you think there's a contradiction there between the man who wants and is ending the two wars in the Middle East, but also the upswell of ISIL? And he didn't mention Al-Qaeda in the speech. He didn't mention Yemen, considering what's been going on.
Well, it would be a tough thing to mention Yemen and Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula right now because it's such a murky situation with essentially a kind of four-way conflict going on in Yemen between the legitimate government of President Hadi, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the forces of former strongman Ali Abdullah Saleh, and the Houthis who have occupied Sana'a. And so it's a very weak state. There's a challenge from terrorists, from sectarian fighters, and from a former president who just refuses to leave. I think the president was addressing the threat that's on everyone's mind, and I think that in a State of the Union speech, the tradition is to have relatively little foreign policy. I think that he felt that he was answering the mail on this one, as we would say.
Actually, he did say quite a lot about foreign policy. One US network said 29% of the speech was foreign policy, which is higher than usual. Majid, there was no mention either of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the so-called peace process. Do you think that was a mission because nothing can be done?
Yeah, I think that I agree with the former ambassador that foreign policy issues usually take a back seat in the State of the Union speech. But I think the president simplified really the complexity of the conflict in the Middle East. He didn't really draw or shed light on the failure of the U.S. foreign policy when it comes to fighting with the Islamic State. What is the agenda of United States when it comes to the President Bashar al-Assad? The U.S. has spent billions of dollars on airstrike, and the result that we're seeing that the Islamic State is actually gaining more territory. So I believe he attempted to avoid topics which are very complicated, because that will have draw more criticism on his policies and his failures to carry out effective policies. So I think one of the reasons that he really just paid a little attention to this issue and he didn't go in depth is to focus more on his domestic accomplishment rather than on his failures in the foreign policies.
Daniel, the omission of Israeli-Palestine conflict and no call there for Bashar al-Assad to step down, which has been a cornerstone of American policy up until now.
Right. Well, on Bashar al-Assad, I think it's indicative because the news reports of the recent days suggested that Washington is putting new emphasis on the diplomatic track going on in a number of places, in Geneva and Moscow and the like, and that for the time being there's going to be less emphasis on removing Bashar and more on ending the fighting, which is truly devastating to the region. The other issue that you raise, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, well, there are at least two very good reasons for not raising that. Number one, the last year has seen real disappointment in terms of the initiative of Secretary Kerry to bring the parties together and to get some kind of agreement, some kind of momentum going. That's number one, and we are still in the immediate aftermath of that and wondering what else we could possibly do and whether it's worth an investment of U.S. diplomatic resources and energy. The other thing is that Israel is headed for an election, and I think the last thing the president wants to do is say anything that could move that election one way or the other. It's always the wise thing to let the combatants on the ground, the political combatants, have their say, and for a foreign nation to stay in the background. So no surprises there. I did not expect him to bring it up. There's not a lot of hope right now. The Israelis think that they're in a very, very rough neighborhood and they are not prepared to make sacrifices or to take big risks for peace. And I think that the president probably decided that it would take some more time before there was any opportunity to discuss this again.
One problem that has been intractable for the president, even though he ran on it when he first ran for office, was Guantanamo Bay, Gitmo. And he pledged again to do everything in his power to close it before his term is up. Majid, does that resonate around the world, and do you think he can do it?
I think, as you know, the State of the Union speech is always full of promises, which cannot be fulfilled. Usually, they are idealistic, and I think usually the tactic that President Obama uses is to blame the Congress for not passing a legislation, for instance, in this case, to allow the transfer of detainees to other places. So I think the pointing fingers at each other or blaming each other is one of the tactics which is used. And from what we see now, I don't think there is really a prospect of passing such legislation through the Republican-controlled Congress. But again, I wanted also to add something about the contradiction that you see in the foreign policy issues, particularly when it comes to the Syrian government. We just talked about it. I think you see the administration want to on the one hand, it wants to defeat the Islamic State, but on the other hand, it doesn't want to, as it said, to overthrow the President Bashar al-Assad. And again, we were expecting this year to hear from President Obama that the soldiers have been withdrawn from Iraq and Afghanistan, but I think he found himself in a difficult situation that not only they have not withdrawn, we are now engaged in other war with the Islamic State and sending more soldiers to Iraq to advise the Iraqi government.
Daniel, you know, the Guantanamo reputation is something that US President Barack Obama has said a lot, that it harms our reputation. And his view of foreign policy is you build alliances and you go along with, you don't act unilaterally except against terrorism. The Republicans' riposte at the State of the Union is that American foreign policy has been weakened during the Obama presidency. What's your feeling?
Well, of course, I served in the Obama administration, yeah. and I certainly don't think that our position in the world has weakened. I think that I very much support the president's view. My last job in government was as coordinator for counterterrorism, and I strongly felt that the persistence of Guantanamo was an enormous problem for us internationally, and I strongly supported the administration's effort to send detainees home wherever they could be, or to try them or bring them to justice in the United States. And I see no reason why our excellent Bureau of Prisons, with some of the highest security prisons in the world, couldn't deal with these individuals. But for the Republicans, this is a red line, and they have, I think, raised fears that having terrorists on the mainland would be unsafe. I think that's a mistake. But they also want to maintain this special category of terrorists as being a threat far beyond any kind of criminal. And while terrorism is a special category, the notion that we can't handle that category with all the resources at our disposal, it seems to me, is misplaced. And I think they underestimate just how much this is costing us. You know, when the Paris attacks happened, everyone spoke about the remarks of one of the Kouachi brothers who said he was radicalized by what he saw in Abu Ghraib. And you know, in the counterterrorism community, I think there's a strong feeling that Guantanamo plays a similar role in terms of radicalizing individuals, and we should close it for that reason.
We'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much, both of you, for joining us.